What does silence sound like when it listens back? What does silence sound like when it listens back? We treat silence as an absence, a void, the negative space between sounds, the way darkness is the negative space between lights. We say a room is silent the way we say a room is empty, meaning nothing is there, meaning the interesting things have not yet arrived or have already left. Silence, in our understanding, is passive. It waits. It receives. It does not reach. But what if we are wrong about that? What if silence is not the absence of sound but its own thing entirely? A presence, a frequency, a form of communication operating at a register so far beneath our ordinary hearing that we have spent our entire existence on this planet standing directly inside a conversation we never knew was happening. What if the quiet between the notes is not a rest but a word? What if everything we have ever called silence is, in fact, something speaking, something that has been speaking since before our ears existed, in a language that predates not just humanity but the very concept of a listener? Eliot Marsh thought about this his entire adult life. And then, on the night of October 14, 2021, standing at the edge of the Pacific Ocean on a cliff-back stretch of beach outside a fog-wrapped Oregon coastal town called Harlow, he stopped thinking about it, because he finally heard it. This is his story, or at least it is the echo of it, the part that bounced back. Part 1, the town built on fog. Harlow, Oregon sits on a basalt shelf approximately 60 feet above the Pacific, connected to the rest of the Oregon coast by a two-lane highway that, during the winter months, is frequently obscured by the kind of coastal fog that does not simply reduce visibility but appears to actively replace the world with something else. Drivers navigating the approach to Harlow in October or November often describe the experience as passing through a membrane. The highway behind you still clear and present, the highway ahead simply gone, replaced by a white that is not quite white and a silence that is not quite silence. The town has been here since 1887, when a small fishing community established itself on the shelf primarily because the basalt provided protection from the worst of the Pacific storms and the inlet below offered a natural harbor, small but functional. It has never grown much beyond its original footprint. There are roughly 900 permanent residents, a number that has remained stable for decades, not because people don't leave, but because the town has a way of attracting replacements in almost exact proportion to its losses, as if it maintains its own population with a quiet, deliberate ecology. The people of Harlow are, to a degree unusual even for small coastal communities, attuned to sound. This is perhaps not surprising in a place where fog routinely eliminates sight as a reliable sense, where fishermen have historically navigated by the sound of the foghorn and the pattern of the waves against known rocks, where the ocean is always present acoustically even when it cannot be seen. Children in Harlow grow up distinguishing between the sound of a calm sea and an agitated one, between the cry of a cormorant and a gull, between the particular resonance of the fog bell at the harbor entrance and the more distant automated horn at the lighthouse 3 miles south. They also grow up knowing about the sound. Not everyone in Harlow will talk about the sound to outsiders, but everyone knows about it. It is one of those communal knowings that exists below the level of formal acknowledgement, the kind of thing that gets passed between people not in direct conversation but in the way a fishing family passes knowledge of a particular current or a particular rock, through observation and inheritance rather than explicit instruction. You grow up in Harlow and you learn, without being told, that there is something in the water offshore that makes a noise you cannot quite hear, and that this noise is old, and that it is better not to be on the beach alone after midnight. Nobody ever explained exactly why. Nobody had to. Part 2. The man who studied what wasn't there. Eliot Marsh grew up in Columbus, Ohio, approximately as far from any ocean as it is possible to be in the continental United States, and he spent the first 20 years of his life surrounded by a soundscape so relentlessly present. Traffic, machinery, voices, music, the ambient roar of a mid-size American city that never fully quieted even at 3 in the morning. That silence, for him, became not an absence to be ignored but a destination to be sought. He studied physics as an undergraduate at Ohio State, then pivoted to acoustics for his graduate work at MIT, drawn by what his advisor described as an almost pathological interest in the low end of the auditory spectrum, the frequencies below 20 Hz that the human ear cannot detect but the human body can feel, the subsonic range where sound becomes something more like pressure, like weather, like a hand placed flat against your sternum from the inside. Infrasound, as this range is called, is not exotic. It is everywhere. Elephants communicate in it across miles of savanna. Whales use it to navigate ocean basins. Earthquakes generate it. Volcanoes generate it. Atmospheric turbulence generates it. The Earth itself, flexing almost imperceptibly under tectonic stress, generates a constant low infrasonic hum that has been measured at monitoring stations around the globe and which some researchers have taken to calling, with a romanticism unusual in scientific literature, the Earth's heartbeat. Eliot was not interested in the Earth's heartbeat. He was interested in the spaces between the beats. In a paper published in the Journal of the Acoustical Society of America in 2018, 3 years before his disappearance, he wrote about what he called structured silence, periods of time in passive acoustic monitoring data during which not just audible sound but infrasonic activity dropped to near absolute zero. These periods were anomalous. In any given acoustic environment, some level of infrasonic activity is always present. The Earth is always moving, the atmosphere is always shifting. Something is always generating pressure at the low end. A complete cessation of all infrasonic activity is, by conventional physics, essentially impossible. And yet Eliot had documented it. In 17 separate monitoring locations across 9 states. Periods of near-absolute acoustic zero, lasting between 20 and 40 seconds, occurring at irregular but statistically non-random intervals. Not random silences, patterned ones. Silences that repeated with the kind of regularity that, in any other context, would be immediately identified as communication. The paper was well received in his field. It was cited 43 times in the 2 years following publication, which for an acoustics paper is a respectable number. His colleagues found the data interesting and the analysis careful and the conclusions appropriately tentative. Nobody panicked. Nobody lost sleep, except Eliot, who had been losing sleep over this for years. Part 3. The Anomaly off Harlow. The tip came from a colleague named Dr. Sarah Fenwick, who ran the Passive Acoustic Monitoring Network for the Oregon Coastal Research Institute, and who had been puzzling over a particular data anomaly for 8 months before she thought to contact Eliot. The anomaly was this: at a monitoring buoy positioned approximately 400 meters offshore from the beach below Harlow, the system had been recording a repeating infrasonic pattern 0.3 Hz, repeating every 33 seconds, since the monitoring equipment had been installed in March of 2021. It had been there, presumably, before the equipment arrived. The equipment had simply been the first thing in a position to hear it. Sarah's first assumption was instrument error. She replaced the buoy's sensor array. The pattern persisted. She checked for geological sources, submarine fault lines, methane seeps, hydrothermal activity. None of the known geological features of the area matched either the frequency or the repetition interval. She checked for biological sources, gray whale migration routes, large school fish behavior, the acoustic signatures of known deep-sea organisms. Nothing matched. She sent the data to Eliot on a Tuesday afternoon in September 2021 with a 3-line email that said, in its entirety, "Eliot, I have something I can't explain and I think it might be your thing. Call me when you can." He called her 11 minutes later. He was in Harlow 5 days after that. Part 4, the 5 days. Eliot rented a room at the only lodging establishment in Harlow, a 12-room inn called the Cliffside, run by a retired couple named Tom and Barbara Whalen, who had been operating it for 22 years and who prided themselves on a particular brand of warm, no-nonsense hospitality. They fed their guests at a common table, family style, and they asked questions the way people ask questions when they are genuinely curious rather than merely polite, and by most accounts Eliot found this unexpectedly comforting. The warm table, the direct questions, the fog pressing against the windows at night. Tom Whalen described him as a man who was present in his body but somewhere else in his mind, which is perhaps the most accurate description of a theorist in the field phase of a research project anyone has ever produced. He was friendly at dinner. He asked about the history of the town, about the fishing, about the fog. He did not ask about the sound, which Tom noticed because people who come to Harlow to study the coast usually do ask about the sound eventually, and the ones who don't are either the ones who already know about it or the ones who are already hearing it. Each morning, Eliot drove the half-mile from the inn to the beach access path, carried his equipment down the cliffside stairs. A portable acoustic monitoring array, a laptop, a satellite uplink, 2 waterproof notebooks, a thermos of coffee, and set up on the beach. He worked from sunrise until the light went. He ate a sandwich at the beach. He worked some more. He came back to the inn at dusk, ate dinner, went to his room. On the 3rd day, he stopped eating dinner at the common table. Barbara Whalen brought a tray to his room that evening and found him sitting at the small desk with his headphones around his neck and his laptop open to a waveform display that she described as looking like mountains and valleys in red and blue. He thanked her for the tray. He seemed, she said, not frightened exactly but changed. The way a person seems changed when they have received news that they knew was coming but had not quite believed until it arrived. He said something I've thought about a lot since, Barbara told the detective assigned to his case. He said, I've been listening to the recording of this thing for 6 years and now I'm here and I can feel it. I didn't expect to be able to feel it. And I asked him what he meant. And he said, it's in my chest, right here. And he put his hand on his sternum. And then he sort of smiled, like he was embarrassed, and said it was probably just the ocean air. She left him his dinner. She did not see him at breakfast the next morning, or the morning after. Part 5, The Last Notebook. The notebook recovered from Eliot's equipment case on the beach, waterproof, black-covered, identical to the field notebooks used by researchers across every discipline that takes people outdoors, contains 4 days of careful, professional acoustic observations, frequency measurements, signal-to-noise ratios, comparisons with the buoy data, notes on weather conditions and their potential effect on the readings, the kind of notes that tell you everything about what a scientist was measuring and very little about what they were feeling. Until the last page. The first 4 days of notes are dense, small-printed, precise. The 5th day, October 14th, the day he vanished, contains a single entry. Not words, a drawing. It is a wave pattern, a sound wave, rendered with the careful hand of someone who has been drawing waveforms on paper and white boards and napkins for 20 years. It covers the entire page, wall to wall, a single undulating line that rises and falls in a pattern that is, at first glance, simply a wave. But Eliot's colleagues at the university, when shown the drawing in the weeks after his disappearance, did not see it as simply a wave. They saw it as something extraordinary. The pattern drawn in that notebook, hand-drawn in pencil by a man sitting on a beach in October with the Pacific in front of him, matched with a precision that should be statistically impossible for freehand work, a theoretical frequency signature that Eliot himself had described in his 2018 paper as the predicted acoustic shape of a structured silence event if the silence were itself a waveform rather than an absence. It was, in other words, a drawing of what sound would look like if silence were a sound. Dr. Sarah Fenwick, when she saw the drawing for the first time, sat with it for a long time without speaking. Then she said, he found it. He actually found it. Then she cried, which she later said surprised her, because she could not tell whether she was crying because he was gone or because he had been right. Part 6. The Fisherman's Testimony. Dara Osei has fished the waters off Harlow for 17 years. He is a precise and unembellished man. He will tell you exactly what he saw, and he will not speculate about what it meant, and he will not appreciate being asked to do so. He has told his story twice. Once to the Harlow Police Department and once to the Oregon State Police investigator, who took over the case in November 2021. Both accounts are identical in every detail. On the night of October 14th, he was returning from a late run, bringing his boat into the harbor inlet below the town at approximately 1:50 a.m. The fog was heavy but not impenetrable. He could see perhaps 30 meters in any direction, which was enough. As he rounded the southern point of the inlet, he saw a figure on the beach. The figure was standing at the waterline, fully clothed, jacket, boots, dark trousers, facing the ocean, standing perfectly still. Dara watched the figure for approximately 2 minutes from the boat, assuming it was someone who had come down to the beach late, perhaps to watch the water or to clear their head. It was not unknown. People in Harlow went to the beach at odd hours. The ocean at night, he said, has a pull on people. Then the figure began to walk. Not into the shallow surf, the way a person walks when they are testing the water or walking along the edge. Into the ocean. Directly, without hesitation, without slowing, without any of the physical reluctance that the human body normally exhibits when moving from land to cold water. The walk was, Dara said, completely natural. The walk of a person crossing a room towards something they intend to pick up. Like he knew where he was going, Dara said. Like he'd been there before. He watched until the figure was knee-deep, then waist-deep. The water temperature in the Pacific off Harlow in October is approximately 51 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to produce cold shock response within seconds of full immersion, hypothermia within minutes. The figure showed no response to the cold, no hesitation, no flinching, simply walked, and then it was gone. Not submerged, exactly. Dara struggles with this part of his account, and it is the only place where his characteristic precision falters slightly. He says, not submerged, just gone. Between one moment and the next, the figure was present and then it was not, and the surface of the water where it had been was completely undisturbed. He got the boat in, tied it off, ran to the beach stairs. He came down with his flashlight and shone it on the water. The surface was glassy, still. Not the stillness of a protected harbor but an absolute stillness, the kind you do not see on open ocean, the kind that is physically improbable given the swell and the wind. No ripples, no disturbance, no sign that anything had entered the water at all. He called the police from his truck at the top of the stairs. When he came back down to the beach with the first officer, they found Eliot's jacket folded neatly on a dry rock above the tide line. His boots beside it, placed together with the precision of someone who expects to reclaim them. His wallet inside the jacket. His phone inside the jacket. The recording equipment was still running. It had been running all night. It had captured everything, 11 hours of normal ocean ambient sound followed by exactly 33 seconds of absolute acoustic zero, followed by the return of normal ocean sound. The 33 seconds of silence occurred at 2:03 a.m., 13 minutes after Dara watched the figure walk into the water. Part 7. The Dead Phone Calls. The phone was logged into evidence at the Harlow Police Department on the morning of October 15th, the day the investigation formally opened. It was a standard smartphone, for years old. Its screen cracked in one corner from an earlier incident. His battery was at 3% when it was recovered. By the time the evidence log was completed and the phone was placed in its evidence bag, the battery indicator had dropped to 0% and the phone had powered down. It did not charge in the evidence bag. It had no power source. It sat in its sealed bag in the evidence locker at the Harlow PD for 22 days. On November 5th, 22 days after it was recovered, the phone made an outgoing call. The call was received by the voicemail system of the Department of Acoustics at the University of Oregon at 3:33 a.m. The department's voicemail log shows the call originating from Eliot's mobile number. The call duration was 44 seconds. The call was not discovered until the department's administrative assistant checked the voicemail inbox the following morning and found Among the expected accumulation of student questions and faculty messages, a voicemail from a number she recognized as belonging to a man who had been missing for 3 weeks. She called the university's security office. The security office called the police. By 10 a.m., the voicemail had been secured and the phone had been retrieved from the evidence locker for forensic examination. The phone was dead. Completely, comprehensively dead, battery zero, no power, no residual charge. The forensic technician's report states simply and with obvious professional discomfort that there is no mechanism by which the phone could have made the call. The evidence bag seal had not been broken. The phone had not been removed, charged, manipulated, or accessed. It had been sitting, sealed and dead, for 22 days. And it had made a 44-second phone call at 3:33 a.m. The voicemail itself was analyzed by 3 separate audio laboratories: the University of Oregon's facility, a private forensic audio firm in Portland, and the FBI's audio analysis unit. All 3 agreed on the content and the structure. The first 11 seconds, silence. Not recorded silence, not background noise, not ambient ocean sound. Absolute silence, the acoustic signature of a room with perfect sound dampening, or of a space with no physical dimensions at all. The next 33 seconds, a sound. Complex, layered, structured, unlike anything in any known acoustic database. One researcher from the University of Oregon spent 4 months attempting to characterize it and produced a paper that was ultimately not published because, as she wrote to the journal editor in her withdrawal letter, "I cannot publish a paper whose conclusion is that the sound is not from this world, and I cannot publish a paper whose conclusion is anything else, because anything else would be inaccurate." The description that spread informally among the researchers who worked with the recording: what music would sound like if music had existed before ears did, before listeners, before anyone to receive it. A transmission that had been broadcasting into an empty universe for a very long time and had finally, on a fog-wrapped October night on an Oregon beach, found someone standing in exactly the right place to hear it. And then, at the 44th second, just before the call ended, a voice. Eliot's voice, confirmed by voice analysis with 99.4% certainty. Calm, unhurried. The voice of a man who has put down a weight he has been carrying for a very long time. 7 words. The silence is where it actually lives. Call disconnected. Part 8. What he meant. Eliot's colleagues have spent years parsing those 7 words. They are, in the way of the best final transmissions, simultaneously clear and inexhaustible. They mean something obvious on their surface and something unreachable underneath. The obvious meaning: he found the source of the anomaly. The repeating silence, the 33-second pattern, the 0-point acoustic event that his equipment had been chasing for years. He found it, and it lives in the silence. The silence is not an absence surrounding the signal. The silence is the signal. The thing he had been listening for was not the sound in between the quiet. The thing he had been listening for was the quiet itself. This is, in the language of his field, a paradigm shift of extraordinary magnitude. It means that the entire framework by which acoustics understands signal and noise, sound as presence, silence as absence, information as something carried by vibration, is inverted. It means that the spaces between the sounds are not empty. They are full. They have always been full. We simply had no instruments sensitive enough to receive them. Eliot was, in the end, the instrument. The deeper meaning, the meaning that his colleagues approach and then retreat from, that his family holds onto in the dark, is harder to put into language. It has to do with what it means to live in silence. Not to visit it, not to study it, not to measure it from a beach with equipment while your coffee goes cold. To live in it. To be located within it, the way a sound lives inside a room, the way a room exists inside a building, the way a building exists inside a town, the way a town exists inside the world. Eliot walked into the Pacific Ocean on a cold October night. He was not in distress. He was not fleeing anything. He was not confused or compromised or lost. He was arriving. Part 9. The pattern continues. The monitoring buoy off Harlow still transmits its data to the Oregon Coastal Research Institute servers in real time. Dr. Sarah Fenwick still checks it every morning. The anomaly, the 0.3 Hz signal, the 33-second repetition, the structured silence, has not changed. It has not stopped. It has not intensified. It continues exactly as it has since the equipment was first installed in March 2021. Regular as breathing, patient as stone. Sarah has added a second buoy, positioned 200 meters from the first, to determine whether the signal has a directional source. It does. The signal originates from a point on the ocean floor approximately 400 meters offshore, at a depth of about 60 meters, not in a trench, not at a fault line, not at any geologically notable feature. Just a point. A place on the ocean floor that is, by every measurable parameter, entirely unremarkable. Except for what comes up from it. Sarah has applied for funding to conduct a remotely operated vehicle survey of the site. The application is currently under review. She does not expect it to find anything visible. She suspects that whatever is there is not visible, that it is acoustic rather than physical, a feature of the space rather than of the matter within the space. She suspects that if you sent a camera down there you would see 60 meters of dark water and a stretch of sandy ocean floor and nothing else. But she keeps checking the data every morning. Because every 33 seconds, something speaks. And she cannot stop wondering if it is also listening. Part 10. What we know, what we don't, and what the silence holds. Let us be precise. In honor of the man who spent his life in service of precision. Eliot Marsh is missing. His body has not been recovered. The ocean off Harlow has been searched by the Coast Guard and by a private dive team hired by his family, and nothing has been found. No remains. No clothing, no equipment. The official classification is missing, presumed drowned, though this classification sits uneasily with everyone involved. Because drowned people leave things behind. They leave bodies, eventually. They leave ripples. Eliot left folded clothes on a dry rock and a 44-second phone call from a dead phone. There are rational explanations, and they deserve their hearing. A man experiencing a profound psychological break, possibly triggered by sleep deprivation and intense sustained focus on an obsessive research project, walks into the ocean on a cold night and drowns. The body is carried by the current and not recovered. This happens. The voicemail was staged by a person or persons unknown who had access to Eliot's phone number and the technical capability to spoof it, and who created a sophisticated audio recording to accompany the spoofed call. The acoustic anomaly has a geological explanation that has not yet been identified but will eventually be identified. Because things in nature have natural explanations, and the 33-second pattern and the 0.3 Hz frequency are simply features of an unusual but entirely terrestrial geological system. These explanations are possible. They are not, by the evidence, probable. What is probable, or at least what the evidence points toward when you follow it without flinching, is stranger and more beautiful and more terrible than any of the rational alternatives. A man spent his career studying the spaces between sounds. He found that those spaces were not empty. He found that they contained something structured and repeating and, if his life's work was correct, communicative. Something that had been transmitting at a frequency below human hearing for a period of time that no one has yet been able to estimate, because the signal shows no signs of decay, no variation, no drift, nothing that would indicate a start date or a finite source. Something that had been broadcasting into the dark for what might be, for all anyone can determine, forever. And Eliot, standing on a beach in the fog at 2 in the morning with 11 hours of recordings on his equipment and a waveform drawing in his notebook and something in his chest that he could feel against his ribs like a second heartbeat, heard it. Not with his ears. With whatever it is that receives transmissions when the ears are finally quiet enough to stop interfering. And he walked toward it, and it received him. Epilogue. A note on frequency. There is a concept in acoustics called resonance, the phenomenon by which an object, when exposed to a sound at its natural frequency, begins to vibrate in sympathy. A glass shatters when a singer hits the right note. A bridge oscillates when soldiers march in step across it. The frequency reaches the object and the object responds, and in responding it changes. Eliot Marsh argued in papers and conference presentations and late-night conversations with colleagues who were never quite sure whether he was being scientific or philosophical or both, that human beings have a natural frequency. Not a single note, not a simple vibration, but a complex resonant signature, unique to each individual, built from the accumulated frequencies of everything that person has ever been, their biochemistry, their architecture of bone and tissue, the specific patterns of their neural activity, the precise and unrepeatable way that their particular consciousness moves through time. He believed that the structured silences he had been documenting were not random events but targeted ones. That the silence, whatever it was, whatever generated it, was broadcasting at a frequency designed to find specific listeners. That it was not sending a general signal into the void and waiting for anyone to receive it. That it was calling, with great precision and extraordinary patience, for particular people. For the people who had, their whole lives, felt something in the subsonic range of their experience. A pull, a resonance, a sense of a conversation happening just below the threshold of the audible. He wrote this in his private journal, recovered from his room at the Cliffside Inn, in an entry dated October 12th, 2 days before he vanished. I've been wondering lately whether I found this thing or it found me, whether my research led me here or whether something in the data was calling me here specifically, reaching up through the numbers on the screen and the waveforms in the papers and the infrasonic readings on the equipment and calling me by name. Calling me in a frequency I couldn't hear but couldn't stop following, the way you follow a smell without deciding to, the way your feet find the path in the dark. If that's true, if this thing calls specific people, then the question isn't why I came here. The question is, what did it hear in me? He underlined the last sentence. He never answered it in writing. But 3 days later, standing at the edge of the Pacific, he gave it an answer in person. And whatever the silence heard in him, it decided he was the right frequency. And it took him home. Case file number 0089. Status. Open. Last known contact. Voicemail, November 5th, 2021. Body. Not recovered. Suspect. None. Eliot Marsh. Age 41. Acoustician. Remains missing. The buoy transmits. Every 33 seconds, without fail, something speaks. Are you quiet enough to hear it?